Okay, and we are live with Lawrence Whitaker of RuneQuest. This is basically an impromptu question and answer session. If there's any questions from the audience, AetherCon, or any questions at all, we are definitely glad to take those at this point. To start off the conversation, how about you do tell us about the amount of work you've put into RuneQuest to begin with? When did you start? Is there any fun experiences making RuneQuest or writing for?
It's always a fun experience. Career, I began by freelancing for Chaosium, originally starting with their Ring World game, which was, oh gosh, 1980. Work on the Stormbringer and Elric lines, so that was my first foray into being published as a writer, and I worked for Mongoose for 3 years as one of their staff writers and the line editor for RuneQuest when they had the license. And I produced a lot of material in that time. A lot of Glorantha material, a lot of Elric and Eternal Champion. Mainly because I was burning out and I needed to get a bit of distance from the quite punishing schedules that Mongoose had. It was obvious there was an opportunity there to see if myself and Pete Nash, my co-author, and we convinced him that we'd be the guys to do the job. So that's how we then went on to develop with RQ. I mean, it's a game that we both love. We've been playing it for pushing 30 years, a combined, nearly. I think the current rule set, RuneQuest 6, is were put in stuff that we weren't able to include back when we both worked at Mongoose, and I think we've been pretty successful. Conventions and events like this to make sure people know who we are, what we're doing, and really just keep RuneQuest alive and kicking. It deserves to be. So that's our general aim.
Definitely, definitely. Okay. And my apologies here. It seems that my connection might be lagging. So, as far as RuneQuest goes, and generally keeping the whole spirit of it alive, how has RuneQuest 6 differed from previous editions of RuneQuest in the past? Has it followed a evolutionary tree akin to other RPGs that have evolved over the past 30 or so years, or has it kind of relatively stayed along the same path and just kind of blossomed in that way?
It's the answer to that is a bit of both. At its heart, RuneQuest is still has the same characteristics that people that may have come to it when Chaosium first published the game will be familiar with. That made RQ really successful, and an alternative to Dungeons and Dragons back in the day is still there. Areas in which it's combat, we've completely overhauled the combat system in RQ6. We've made it a lot more dynamic, a lot more fun. We've completely rewritten the magic systems as well so that they're internally consistent to previous editions of RQ. Yet all the old spells are still there. Everything is still present. We have what used to be called back. So on sorcery, we've now added mysticism, and we also have a really comprehensive modern age is take some of the more modern concepts around gaming, streamlined, consistent mechanics, it's worked, and I think we've been successful in that regard. So it's a blend of the traditional and the modern, but it's all very, very familiar. Still going to go, I remember how this works, and you won't have any problem adapting to it.
Sounds good. And how do you see the RuneQuest 6 maybe advancing in the future, and then just RuneQuest in general? Are you going to go along the same lines as you've advanced with 6? Are you going to keep those same changes and just maybe keep adapting them to later editions? Or are you looking at perhaps a different approach if we ever do get to RuneQuest 7 and above?
We're to make the very best game that we could with mechanics that are going to stand the test of time, just as the original set into another edition or change anything fundamentally at all. You can always tweak things, but I think that it won't be a sea change in the way that the core rules work. So in terms of the start of next year, we have 2 supplements that are nearing completion. Sort of get some work done. I've been laying out one of the first of those books. That's called Book of Quests, which is a series of 7 sword and sorcery adventures, loosely linked by a common background, but can be plonked anywhere within in your own homebrew campaigns, or even in Glorantha if you're still playing Glorantha. We've also got a setting book called Pulp monsters versus humans kind of setting, and it's part and what we want to do there is give games masters and players a closed environment that they can lots of different areas to explore, lots of monsters, very sandboxy, and dozens and dozens pipeline. They will be out early in 2013. Following on from that, we're going to be doing a series of Mythic Dark Ages Britain, Mythic Constantinople, and hopefully build on those. We want to do with RQ is keep it grounded in real history wherever we can. We found that players and games masters really like that. They like we've also got we have licensed a property that's based on in a new direction, which is what you were asking about a bit earlier, Eric. It will be science fantasy. There will be sphere to it, which is very in keeping with the comic book source material. I'm not going to tell anybody what it is right now. Of the graphic novel series, but I think it's going to be fun. It's going to take RQ into a more modern era. It will allow people to take RQ in a different direction, and I'm really excited about that one. When will there be a Glorantha book coming out? There will be. It probably won't be until 2014, and the main reason for that is releasing the guide to Glorantha, which will be the definitive description of the world. So anything text for that book. So it would be foolish for us to try and make any concrete plans right now without going through that text and understanding what direction we can occupy. But we do have plans, and so Glorantha will get some love and care from us 2014-ish, I would think.
Okay, sounds good. And actually, you did bring up a point there that I was kind of wondering. You do say you add in a lot of historical reference to the RuneQuest line there. Is there any particular period in time that you generally draw influence from or inspiration, or is it just kind of all across the time spectrum? Say
No, we're kind of, but both Pete and I are very, very like-minded in our tastes. We like the classical era, so ancient Greece, ancient Rome, kind of thing. So we tend to focus more on the ancient stuff. As a personal interest, I love Dark Ages Britain. That's yeah, an era that I've studied quite a lot through personal reading, through fiction reading. So for me, that and the more modern stuff. So you're probably not going to see too many medieval or post-medieval books from us. What you will see are books that focus more on the early years of the first millennium.
Interesting. Okay, so let's switch topics here just to keep things going along. As far as say, actually, here's a random question. This might be not one you usually hear. As far as your own preferences for playing games, do you tend to be on the DM side of the screen, or do you prefer being a player?
Oh, GM all the time. I really enjoy it. I have a lot of fun if I've got the right players, and I've been very lucky in the players that I have had. I love telling stories, and I find
And is there any kind of experiences you've had on the DM side of the screen worth mentioning as maybe a silly quip or a funny story, or maybe a more dramatic experience?
they tend to crop out when you're drunk, and things that happened when you were drunk are not necessarily funny to other people. I've had lots and lots of really, really good sessions. As I said, I've been very, very lucky with my players. They've all been like me, storytellers. They like to get invested in the characters. They like to get invested in the plot. So we tend really not to get too hung up on the rules and the gaming aspects of it. If a story is working, I think probably the most satisfying and the most rewarding is an ongoing. I've already mentioned that I adore Dark Ages Britain. I based the play. It's called the Warlord Saga. It's the Winter King, Enemy of God, and Excalibur. And what characters develop over a long time period, over maybe 15 or 20 years, play through the events in those. At our annual pilgrimage to Pete Nash's house in northern Sweden, and it to GM it, but also best in the way that the players have reacted to it. What we found is that the campaign started out as actually being very close to the first of Bernard Cornwell's novels, and then it suddenly flipped on its head and changed dramatically towards the end of the first campaign. feature of RQ6 started to drive things. It wasn't combat, it wasn't general skill use. Changed the nature of the game, and it suddenly took on an entirely new dimension that continued through the second campaign session I ran last year, which focused on the second book of that series. When we're now at a point where the things that the characters have done are kind of like what happened in the novels. In February next year, and it's plain that it's going to go in a completely different. Hugely looking forward to it. I can see all sorts of interesting opportunities, and I think that's one of the beauties of role-playing and having great players and telling a great story. You never know what to expect, and some of the drama that comes out of this is as good as anything you could watch on you could sit down and read, and yet you're living it. You have the players there, they are driving things. As a GM, God, it's satisfying when it works out, and I think that is the best satisfying thing I've been involved in.
Next. Now, just seeing some influence from various novels, whatnot, is there any particular author or novel series that you've particularly kind of looked to for guidance, maybe as a younger individual in life? Or maybe even to this point, is there any particular author that you do enjoy reading that may have a impact on how you do GM?
Influence. I started reading Moorcock when I was about 11 or 12. I devoured the entirety of his output at that time, and this is when Moorcock was still very, very prolific. You know, he was churning out a book a month probably, and I read all of them, read his entire back catalogue. So Michael Moorcock's been a huge influence on me. And I said at the start of the interview that you know, I did a lot of work on the Elric role-playing game, the Stormbringer role-playing game. That's always been one of my first loves. So Moorcock stuff, very definitely. Other authors that influenced me, Bernard Cornwell, obviously. I've read a lot of his material. But I tend to pick up influences from whatever I'm currently reading at the moment. I'm a big Ian Banks fan, both his science fiction stuff and his mainstream stuff. And so if I'm reading a Banks novel, I will find something I'm working on getting Banks references thrown in there, or I'll start developing a character in a sort of more Banksian way. So I'm a bit of an empath and a bit of a chameleon when it comes to things like that. So Moorcock, Banks, Cornwall. Who else has influenced me? Clark Ashton Smith, big Clark Ashton Smith fan. A little bit of Robert E. Howard. I'm not a massive Howard fan. Fritz Lieber, love Fritz Lieber stuff. The Langmar series is just a classic, so that has informed quite a lot of things that I've done in the past. But it tends to be the classic sword and sorcery authors, and I think nowadays those writers that can actually put an interesting twist on familiar things, they're the ones that really interest me the most. Traditional fantasy, I don't read a heck of a lot of, to be honest. I pick and choose very carefully.
I see. Now, currently, one of the things I was wondering too, and this is going to be a question from someone on the other side of the world. How is the scene in Europe in general for gaming? I've heard all sorts of varying things. Does it seem like the industry might be expanding there? Is there an amount of conventions comparable to other places in the world? Or is it still kind of a niche community that's maybe growing or declining?
I think it's very difficult to gauge. Depending on who you talk to, you'll get a very different picture of what state the industry is in. Some believe it's contracting and it's going to snuff itself out in the next few years. Others maintain it's stable. So there's some claim that it's growing. The way that Europe seems to differ from from the North American side of things is the nature of the games there tend to be different. There's quite a large fan base for games that probably don't get quite as much love in North America. By that I mean there's less emphasis on Dungeons and Dragons. There's more emphasis on games like RuneQuest, basic role playing. That isn't to say that those games aren't played, but there seems to be a more balanced viewpoint about what systems are available and so what gets used. In terms of the overall industry, there is no doubt that it is contracting. The people that came into this hobby are probably my generation and the generation that came after me. We're getting older. We have families, we have jobs, we have real lives. You have less and less time for role playing. As a consequence, the market seems to be contracting, and I think when my generation has hung up its dice bag, then that's probably the point where it will have contracted to a conceivable point. I think that's true worldwide, and I think that's true of any hobby. They go through phases. It's probably quite remarkable that role-playing has lasted anywhere near as long as it has. And if it can last this long, it can certainly last another 30, 40, 50 years, or even carry on indefinitely. Who knows? It's always going to be a niche. It always has been a niche. There was a boom era. That's gone. But that went a long time ago. And I think that role-playing, certainly in Europe and probably worldwide, has probably reached a comfortable level where it will probably not expand hugely, but it won't contract at a phenomenal rate. It will decline very, very slowly, and that happens in every kind of hobby. In terms of conventions, there are lots of European conventions. Europe adores its conventions. I go to several habitually. I used to run a reasonably sized convention in the United Kingdom called Continuum that attracted anywhere up to 300 participants, which is pretty good for your weekend convention there. Lots of residential conventions in the UK, Conception, Continuum, Dragon Meet. There's quite a healthy convention scene there. The same is true in Europe too. There's a very big convention in Finland called AetherCon. That attracts maybe up to 1,000 people over the course of a weekend. Similar one in Sweden. There's Essenspiel in Germany, which, although it's a trade fair, has a very big sort of gaming dedicated side to it. So it's actually a very healthy scene. The Europeans are also really big into their freeform gaming as well, LARPs and sort of the more cosplay side of things. A very healthy scene with that too. Lots of live action role playing goes on, more probably than in North America, in my experience. They really do like to dress up, act the character with minimal rules, get involved in lots of intrigue and plots and things. So that's a key difference, I think.
No kid. And other parts of the gaming community, maybe not so much on roleplay and possibly LARP, even though I do enjoy LARP myself. Is there a large miniatures wargame community as well? It does seem Games Workshop might have a considerable influence on that.
Yes, that's true. I think there's Warhammer is probably not as big as it used to be, but yeah, Games Workshop you still see on a Saturday morning, lots of youngsters there with their Space Marines and their Space Orcs battling out on the big scenery, and that's really good. It's great that that is still alive and well. My son is 16, and although we live in Canada now, we moved here 3 years ago, and there was a Warhammer club at his school, so that's still very much alive and kicking. I'm not a big war gamer. It's very rare that I use figures, so I'm really not qualified to comment on the size of the wargaming and the figures side of the industry. It appears to be healthy still dominated by Games Workshop, but I think Europe has always had a very healthy traditional wargaming community with Napoleonics, the Ancients, and so forth, but it's not really my scene, so I can't speak on how big or strong it is.
I see, I see. And actually, since you did bring up LARP, have you ever gone LARPing yourself, or have you experienced any?
Oh
Okay.
yeah, yeah. I haven't done a lot of the rubber sword, which that's a horrible term to use. I really don't mean it derogatory. I'm just trying to scrabble for the traditional live action role playing experience. I've not done a lot of that, so I haven't been walking around in improvised dungeons as part of a party of characters to hit things. I've done a lot more freeform gaming, which is more it's more about the costuming and getting into the character. There tends to be very little, if any, combat whatsoever. I've done my fair share of those. I've written one and contributed to a couple of others, and they can be huge fun. They really can. And but again, they're very time intensive. Some of these things take up to 12 hours to play, and as I get older, I've got less energy, and I don't want to be engaged in something for quite that long. So I pick and choose which free forms I get involved in these days. But I do enjoy them.
Okay, sounds good. And Canada, how are you enjoying that as of late? Was the
Oh,
move
Canada's great. We came here because the UK is too full, too expensive, too regulated, too overtaxed, and we wanted a better quality of life, and we knew that we could get that in Canada. I've worked here previously. I've got friends here. So yeah, we've been here 3 years. We have a really nice house out in the country. Just looking to my right now, I can look down to our pond where my canoe is floating. Which reminds me, I've got to bring it off the pond, or it's going to get frozen in there when it gets really cold. And yeah, we love it. The pace of life here is very different to the UK. There's lots of gaming going on as well. I have a semi-regular group in Toronto that I play with, and it's interesting the number of game designers that are in Toronto. Robin Laws lives not far from where I work. Brad Murray, that developed Fate and Diaspora, is part of my regular gaming group. So it's I live about 10 minutes from Ed Greenwood, and I see Ed at local conventions all the time. So it's amazing how much super talent there is around where I live, and that wasn't a deliberate decision to come and live near these people. We just sort of gravitated. Maybe it's ley lines. It's ley lines. That's it. Canadian ley lines. It brought us all together. We're going to form the super group of gaming design.
Oh yeah. And actually, were you guys hit by that storm that came through the western side of the coast not too long ago,
Hurricane
within the last week or so?
Hurricane Sandy. Yeah, we kind of got the tail end of it. We lost power for a few hours, and it got pretty windy. A couple of trees came down, but nowhere near as bad as the East Coast got hit. I
Yes.
mean, just I was watching the devastation. It was pretty horrible. We missed all of that, fortunately. We were braced for impact, but it didn't really happen as I think the meteorologists thought it might do. So well, I think we got away lucky.
Indeed. And let's see here. I'm going to check and see if we have any last minute questions. It does look like we're going to run out of time here in a few moments. Okay. And as far as a few last questions, is there any particular? Let me think. I'm trying to. Okay. All right. A billion things on feed at once here. As far as the Toronto scene, though, it does seem like that's actually kind of booming, and that's not something I did figure Canada would have as large of a gaming community. That was actually kind of surprising news there.
Yeah, it is surprising. I mean, the number of game shops in Toronto has fallen. There are two of note. One is Hairy Tarantula, which is infamous in gaming circles. It's a real old style attic game shop where you do stick to the carpets on the way up. It's very small, very cramped, but it's got a fabulous selection of games. Then there's 401 Games, which is just up the road, and that tends to focus more on Paizo, WotC stuff, and Magic the Gathering. But yeah, it's reasonably healthy. as I said, there's that for some reason there's a really good group of game designers that live in Toronto and are Canadian by birth. I've been to several local conventions here, and yeah, D&D 4th edition, 3rd edition, Pathfinder, they're still alive and kicking. They get a lot of love. I was at one in a town called Peterborough, which is the closest one to me, a few weeks ago. They were doing a World of Darkness themed weekend. And that convention was actually growing. I've watched it grow over the past 3 years. It went from about 80 people to 120, and they're now up to about 200. So it can grow, and certainly where I am, that's what I'm seeing. It's not on the verge of death yet.
Excellent. Sounds good. And it is looking like that might just very well be the last question there. That's probably a good note to leave off on there. But definitely, I'm optimist.
Optimistic.
Well, yeah, optimist. No, I'm very. Oh well, I'm not having not enough coffee today. Not enough coffee at all.
Well,
But
you can see I'm
yeah.
on my second mug. Yeah, I'm optimistic too, Eric. You know, I think that if this hobby was going to die, it would have died by now. We keep clinging on there. I think that we do keep bringing new people in, probably in smaller numbers, but we do. And to me, that's very, very satisfying. So I think that there's still a long way to go yet.
Definitely. And so, looking forward to the future here. And
Yep, me
speaking of
too.
the near future, I'm going to be having you again around. Let me check my schedule here.
At
Just
3 o'clock Eastern Standard.
yes, there we go. There we go. Didn't want to mess up the schedule time there. However, I will be seeing you at that time, and I
You will. I look forward to it.
definitely. And hoping you have a good time till then, and enjoy the rest of AetherCon.
Thank you very much, and thanks for everybody for all the questions. That was really great. I enjoyed it.
Definitely. And thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye all.